in the room.
Amen.
Good evening. We are calling the meeting to order. We do have a quorum, and I'll need a motion to suspend the rules to participate virtually. Do I have a motion?
Motion to
So
suspend the
motion.
rules.
Oh,
Wonderful. I have a motion, and Kathy, do I hear a second?
second.
Great. And Jessica, will you call the roll, please?
I will. Thank you. Kathy Hayes.
Here.
Thank you. Chair Olds-Fry.
Yes, here.
Thank you. Cherie Lackey.
Yes.
Thank you. Vice Chair Ohanian.
Yes.
Thank you. Amanda Ngola.
Yes.
Thank you. And Archana Sood.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And our second item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from May 12th. The minutes are attached. I will need a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a motion?
A motion.
Thank you, Cherie, and I will need a second.
Second.
Thank you, Kathy. Jessica, will you call the roll, please?
Actually, I'm sorry. Let me invite Councilmember Burns.
Good evening, Councilmember Burns. We are just getting ready to adopt the minutes from the May 12th meeting. And Jessica's gonna.
Perfect, thank you.
Kathy Hayes.
Here. Yes. Sorry.
Thank you. Chair Olds-Fry.
Yes.
Thank you. Cherie Lackey.
Yes.
Thank you. Vice Chair Ohanian.
Yes.
Thank you. Amanda Ngola.
Yes.
Perfect. Archana Sood.
Yes.
Thank you. And Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And we will open up the discussion for our first public comment period. We will have another one. Oh, it's not on the agenda, but we'll offer up another opportunity for public comment, but I will pause to see if anybody from the public would like to make any comments before the committee today. We are not seeing any requests for public comments. We'll continue to the next item of our agenda. And we'll start, I apologize, with the 2022 Emergency Solution Grant recommendation. Jessica?
Sure. Thank you so much. I do have, if I could just share my screen. Staff is presenting the 2022 allocations for the Emergency Solutions Grant. The Emergency Solutions Grant is pretty prescriptive, and by that I mean we have 4 categories, and then a small portion, 7.5% of the grant reserved for administration costs. The 4 programs are street outreach, shelter operations, homeless prevention, and rapid rehousing. The 2 primary, historically primary grantees are the YWCA for shelter operations in the amount of $15,000 and Connections for the Homeless. Connections for the Homeless is part of the continuum of care. And they often act as the banker. They work very closely with smaller providers of resources for people experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, like Family Promise and Interfaith Action. And Connections for the Homeless receives a portion of, has historically received a portion of funding of ESG for all 4 of the programs: street outreach, shelter operations, homelessness prevention, and rapid rehousing. So I would like to say that the amounts for street outreach and shelter operations, there is a cap I also want to point out that homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing can take the form of direct subsidies. So typically those funds are used to pay direct rental support for eligible households. And then a portion can also go toward the staffing, which includes case management or like their housing locator. Yep, and the funds between prevention and rapid rehousing are a little bit more fluid. So if we find that, for example, we are spending, we have a lot of requests for rapid rehousing, we can shift funds from prevention to rapid and vice versa. But HUD likes it when we prioritize rapid rehousing. So that is typically what HUD staff has suggested. And you can see here, these are our 2021 allocations. And then our 2022 recommendations. The grant is allocated based on percent. And so it's pretty fixed, but I'm happy to take any questions.
I have one question, but I want to open it up for committee members first. There's just a ever so slight decrease from 158 to 154. Is there a reason for that decrease?
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Sam.
It's the formula. It is just a formula, and it is, we just get told what we get.
Is good to know. Thank you very much, Sarah. All right. Anything else? Then do you need a motion, Jessica, or is this an update?
I do. Hold on, I apologize. I'm attempting to promote Council Member Reed to chat to a panelist, which is why my screen looks so goofy right now. I apologize.
That's okay. Because this is going to the council for recommendation, correct?
Correct. It will go to Human Services. So the Social Services Committee recommendation will go to Human Services at their next meeting. And then assuming Human Services approves, it will go to City Council for final approval. And I should say that we have not, we know our grant amount, but we technically haven't received our grant from HUD. That probably won't happen until August or September. And that is when we can actually start using the money, but
Perfect.
just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Councilmember Burns.
Thank you. So are we just approving the different areas or categories where the funds are going to go, or the recipients tonight, or both?
Both.
Okay.
There are no other recipients that are really, it's not that they aren't eligible for the Emergency Solutions Grant, it's that they don't have the administrative capacity. Oftentimes what happens is, especially for prevention and rapid rehousing, the organization receiving those funds have to, they're paid retroactively. So like Connections has to pay landlords first, and then be able to have those funds out of their budget for
Yeah, they get reimbursed.
Right, and then they're
Okay.
reimbursed.
So all this 154, and I probably missed the beginning of this, but is going to Connections.
No,
We'll go
that
to-
is
okay.
actually, I'm sorry, annoying dog. That is not the case. Let me get those breakdowns for you. So
Okay.
Connections for the Homeless is receiving 115, or excuse me, the 1549 for street outreach.
Okay.
They're receiving $35,357 for emergency shelter. The YWCA is receiving $15,000 for
Okay.
emergency shelter. So that shelter allocation is not split, but it is divvied up.
Yep.
Great. And then yes, Connections would receive the $54,231 for rapid rehousing. And,
What about homeless prevention? I think we skipped over that one.
yes, Connections would receive that whole amount
Okay.
for prevention also.
Okay.
So
And then-
vast majority.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Burns. Derek?
Thank you, Chair. I think similar to Councilmember Burns and Chair Oldwright's questions. Why, in 22, we increased the rate of the allocation for what we provide for homeless prevention, and then we decrease the rate for rapid rehousing? I'm just curious, just to understand why.
Sure, that's a good question. We have historically funded at 35% for rapid rehousing. And the funds between rapid rehousing and prevention are fluid. So we have seen an uptick in the number of requests Connections has received for prevention funds. So we thought we would shift back to those historic levels. But if we hear in working with Connections that they're not getting as many prevention requests, and we weren't, Connections has 2 years to expend these funds. So if we find that we aren't receiving the requests for prevention, we could shift those funds back to rapid rehousing.
A note, in 2021, we reduced the prevention because prevention, we couldn't use prevention funding while there was a moratorium on evictions, because for prevention funding, you have to have an eviction notice to be able to make somebody eligible. Seems like years ago that we were doing that, but what's funny is this was the very first major decision and recommendation this committee made after being formed was the ESG recommendation. So this is, and as Jessica mentioned, we don't yet have our grant amount, our grant agreements. In fact, our updated action plan is going to the Housing and Community Development Committee at its meeting on the 21st, and then it will go to council, and then it has to go to HUD. But this is something we just can get ready. If we get it approved and out of the way, then when we get the funding, we can get the grant agreements out and give them access to funding as quickly as possible. There's a lot of change in availability of any kind of rent assistance. There's been most of it has been distributed already. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to jump on this and get it done so that we can implement it as fast as possible.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? So then I need a motion to, there
Move
we go.
approval.
Yes, sorry, for approval of these recommendations. And was that a motion from
Yes.
Councilmember Reed? Perfect, wonderful. I need a second. Did we?
Second.
Second.
All right, and Jessica, will you call the
Thank
roll,
you.
please?
Kathy Hayes. Thank you. Samantha Oldsbry, Chair Oldsbry.
Yes.
Sheree Lackey.
Yes.
Thank you. Vice Chair Ohanian.
Yes.
Thank you. Amanda Ngola. Aye. Thank you. Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Thank you. And Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right, and we'll go to our next agenda item, which is the proposal for ARPA childcare provider retention pay program for action. Jessica, do you want to provide an update?
Yes, could I share my screen once again?
So this is a new thing. This is our first bringing an ARPA proposal to this committee, and that was the decision of council that services should go through this committee. I just wanted to point out the history that we had. This was one of the things that the Evanston Early Childhood Council initially brought up the need for help for childcare centers and specifically for premium pay to help retain their workers. So you've heard about this before and heard it will be coming. So this is the first step of the childcare stuff. Jessica, go ahead.
Great. So the goal of this program is to provide premium pay for staff of DCFS licensed home care and center care providers. We want to target providers that serve 51% or more low moderate income households. And those providers, we're estimating, staff is proposing that those providers would that each staff member who is a licensed gateway participant would receive a bonus of $1,200. We would also fund additional DCFS licensed providers. So this would include our part-time center providers at the rate of $600 per staff member. And again, we want to target providers that employ primarily women and people of color. This definitely includes our home care providers, the majority of whom are women and women of color. Staff came to this budget by first talking to providers to understand their needs. We put out a form that captured the number of staff members, the number of staff registered through gateways, and gateways staff typically include teachers, classroom assistants, home visitors. So there's a wide range of staff, but all of those staff are in front-facing positions and are eligible as essential workers. We then also looked at the number of children that those households employed and of their staff, how many identified as people of color and how many identified as women. So we received results from 20 programs, and we know that that's a portion of the DCFS list. So then we also looked at the number of DCFS spots available for children. And then we sort of guesstimated that based on the number of children that had been enrolled, the number of additional staff that may apply. And the budgeted number that we came up with does align with, as Sarah mentioned, the original request of the Evanston Early Childhood Council. And it reflects what we're hearing from that community.
If I can just add a little thing, this is a type of program that doesn't exist in any of our other funding sources so far. And one of the things that is very important is we have childcare providers that are, as Jessica said, center-based. But within that center-based, there are both for-profit and nonprofit. And there are also, some of the nonprofit center-based do
Can you hear Sarah?
Sarah, you're on mute.
Here, Sarah.
Okay. Sarah, we lost you.
I don't know how I muted myself without even touching my mouse. That's remarkable. I've developed new powers I never knew I had. So anyway, sorry, I'm not sure where I managed to mute myself, but this is what we've done here is create a class of providers that includes both for-profit and nonprofit, center-based and home-based. And within each of those groups, we have some of them provide deep levels of services to lower income residents, so that those are the ones that are the 51% low and moderate income households. That's we are trying to make sure we focus funding on the providers that are providing care to the people who've been disparately impacted by COVID as well, or first, or at a higher level, because their organizations, because of the cash flow, they get, or the cash flow they don't get, for the, CCAP, for example, never fully reimburses the cost of the care. We felt it was more important to be able to reward them at higher levels because their staff, their organizations don't have the opportunity or the cash flow to give them any kind of bonus pays. And, it's kind of like a comparable thing might be the large grocery stores or drugstores or things that could, but a small corner store that couldn't, that sort of thing. So we're really trying to make sure that we reach and help give more help to the organizations that are both themselves probably less financially able to provide more pay, and also still need to keep their staff, because this is very much a staff retention program. Childcare workers generally start at about $14 an hour. And even the highest paid ones with bachelor's degrees and others are usually making no more than $25 an hour. So all kinds of jobs, anything from working at the Chick-fil-A, which has higher wages right now and more flexible schedules. And of course, they are absolutely front-facing workers. And also their work is with the only people who cannot get vaccinated still, which are children, young children. So their vulnerability is also higher. So it's a lot of ARPA eligibility and all those things that, really aligns it with the goals of the funding, and also with very high need in the community.
Absolutely. Councilmember Reed.
Sir, can you go to the next slide? I think I saw something. Yeah. Okay. No, I guess eligibility. I just wonder, are we a bit late to the ball game on this? And certainly still happy to move this forward and supporting this fully, but
Actually, one of the reasons that this timing is appropriate is the state of Illinois, it might have been through ARPA, but it wasn't through SLFRS, did a similar program. And there is still, it hasn't changed the pay scales for the workers, and they still are having, our providers are having real concerns about retaining their workers. So this is significantly after the states, but still important to try to, as I say, retain workers for our childcare centers.
Well, and if I may say, the state's program was opened in September of last year. So I hope that we're not that far behind.
and is there to this day still a retention issue now? Is this something that now is still being reported? And is this being reported across, is this just in the childcare industry? Or is this being reported, as you mentioned, in the other retail and frontline service industries currently?
So I don't know about other frontline industries, but I did hear that retention was a big challenge for Evanston childcare providers. I spoke with Learning Bridge, Infant Welfare Society, and certainly the Evanston Early Child Care Council, which represents quite a number of care providers, both home and center. And so the Skokie Evanston Wilmette organization for home care providers all reported that retention was the biggest challenge. So we do see this as a retention program. The proposal is to provide funding to agencies in a lump sum that they would have up to 6 months to expend. And so, yes, it's still definitely a need.
And I
A
will just
lump
add-
sum that they,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, a lump sum
Councilmember.
that they'd have, and if, Sarah, can you go back to the previous page one more time? So that you would provide them with a lump sum that they would have 6 months to expend on,
Staff.
It would be restricted to the staff bonuses. In other words, we want to give them some flexibility for when they implement actually giving the bonuses. I mean, you'll see when we get to the schedule or what we expect to be the schedule that, for example, it might be, they might choose to not release the funds like right when they first get it, but we're getting close to the holiday season. They might want to time it so that it's more, tied to close to a holiday season or something like that. We don't, and also their administrative challenges and processes. So we want to give them a little flexibility on when they release it, but then they have to have all their reporting to us within 6 months at the end of 6 months and be able to show. They have to provide us source documents that who they paid, how much, and that the people were actually getting paid. So we get the same kind of payroll information that we get when an agency is billing staff to us for a program. So that's all very important and all required by ARPA. We kill people with compliance, unfortunately, even in the simplest programs.
and what is the maximum award a single agency can receive?
So that's
We
based
don't-
on the number of staff the
Mhm.
agency has. I don't know that we have a cap, but it's the cap would be the number of staff enrolled in Illinois Gateway, which is a licensing and credentialing program run through the Department of Human Services, I believe. I could look that up.
A state
Most of-
agency.
One of the things, I'm just looking for we have a spreadsheet that has staff numbers for the agencies that responded. And so we could give you, if I can find it, I can give you a rough estimate of how many, what a range of grants might be.
If I could stop sharing, I've got that.
I opened some things, but not necessarily all the right things in my browser here.
While you're looking for that, Councilmember Reed, do you have more questions or should we ask Kathy her questions?
Kathy, you can go ahead. I'll yield my time.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you so much. I know I am new to the group as well. I'm a little confused about, I had some of the very same questions as the council member did have. So these are, I just want to be clear, these are only agencies that are in Evanston, where the employees are employed in Evanston, these
Yes.
frontline workers for this staff retention program. This is a bonus for them outside of the income they're receiving for their day-to-day work. They will also be taxed on this bonus as any other person will be taxed on the bonus.
Unfortunately, that's true. Yes.
Okay, and it is I'm a little confused as who gets the 1,200 versus who gets the 600.
That is fair. So agencies working primarily with low moderate income households will receive a larger bonus because those agencies don't have the luxury of charging more for the services they provide. And so we're recommending the reduced amount for staff working for
We have full pay.
for full pay services, because those agencies that are charging market rate for childcare have a little bit more flexibility and how much they can pay their staff.
Okay, so they get to tell I guess my next question is, how much of the fund is going to be dedicated to this retention program is where I'm also fuzzy.
So.
Is there $500,000 cap? Is, you know, I mean,
What we've planned is that the bulk of it will be for direct funding to the workers. Depending on, and one of the challenges is, of course, we've made our estimates of how many might be eligible, how many might be, we don't have the forms filled out from the childcare providers to say what the incomes, what their income ratio or what percent of people are at what income level. And we've estimated the number of teachers. So we've made a formula and figured this out. We came up with 610 potentially eligible people was our guess from looking at our best estimate from looking at all that. And of the respondents who had responded to our first sort of preliminary survey to try to figure out how to structure this, just under half were serving substantial numbers of low and moderate income families. So we estimated this based on 300 workers being eligible for the higher level and the 310 being eligible for the lower. Now, we don't know for sure that's going to happen. So one of the things that is, we're saying, this is what we're proposing. We will then, assuming approval by the committee and all the following things, we will issue these relatively simple applications for all the childcare providers to be able to apply. And then we're going to have to do the math and see how it came out. And if our math isn't right, then what we need to do is bring back a recommendation to the committee of how to adjust. Because frankly, I don't know how else to do it. We don't want to do it. We're not going to fund on a rolling basis. There will be a deadline by which organizations have to get their applications in. And that's really the only way we've been able to figure out to structure this in a way that we think will be equitable to the providers and also, but give you a basis of what we expect would be. We're not necessarily going to try to come back for more funding in total. The ARPA budget has this amount for premium pay in that bucket. If we were way over, it's not like we're going to say, oh, well, great, we can give them all $2,500. We're not going to do that either. So this is, based on, we did a lot of looking at programs, not just the state program, but we looked throughout the country at the levels that other organizations were doing. We found some really interesting things that we didn't agree with. One place was doing higher levels for the higher paid staff. And we were kind of like, how does that help retain people? You're not helping the people who are probably most vulnerable to going and working at McDonald's. That didn't make sense to us. So this is the first time we've ever had a program like this. So we've done a lot of talking with a number of the childcare providers, a lot of research on what else is being out there, looked at the guidance from Treasury, and that's what the program is based on. And we think it, based on discussions with the childcare providers, they feel this will have significant impact on the well-being of their staff members as well, which is very important. We don't want to come up with something that they go, oh, that was nice, and then they leave right away. And one of the things, frankly, that a provider could choose to do is, for example, divide the amount that they're giving to a worker into 2 payments if they want to. That sort of thing they were actually asked if they could do that. And if they think that is going to improve their retention of staff, then we think that's a reasonable flexibility to give them. But we didn't want to get into dictating some of those things because, frankly, the capacity of different places to do the paperwork and all that stuff is very different too. So we don't want to burden them. We don't want to over structure the program that makes it even harder for them because they're strapped for administrative capacity. And if there is a possibility of doing this, we may look to see if we can add a relatively small, we haven't figured out what it would be, but it would come back to the committee, administrative cost for the organizations for just doing the paperwork and stuff. That is allowable. So, I wish I had absolute answers for you all on this, but we just don't have them. Because as I say, we've developed the framework and the structure, but we don't know exactly how many applications we'll get.
Because I'm sure there's more than, I know you did an analysis, but I'm sure there's more than 22 childcare entities that are eligible for this type of funding. And my last question is, and thank you for that. I love childcare people. They saved my life because I was a single mother. I have no problem with that. I was just curious. So this is, once that ARPA fund is tapped out or reaches its limit, whatever that limit is, this will not be revisited, or is this going to try to be an ongoing program for retention?
The city doesn't have the capacity to continue it. There is a great deal of recognition at the federal level and at the state level that compensation for childcare is out of line with the work. I think, it's like in this country, the fact that childcare isn't available on a much broader basis. We're the only first world country that basically expects parents to be able to pay for their childcare, and their early childhood education and everything until kids get into kindergarten. Virtually every country has free or very low cost childcare, universal childcare. There have been movements to try to get to universal childcare. Frankly, I hope we get there. Everything says the earliest years are the most formative years and the most critical. And somehow our systems do not recognize that in the way we provide care.
So we would be infusing for 1 year, and then the next year we would still be struggling for retention.
Well, we wouldn't have the resources to provide it.
Okay.
But we do need to keep people working in childcare and keep childcare slots available and to provide the help that we can at the moment. At least that's our opinion based on our discussions with them and with the childcare providers.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Burns.
Thank you. Has there been any survey of employees in this field where we know why? So let me step back. Is the issue that people have, the childcare providers have, employees have quit? Is it that once they quit, they both quit and it's been hard to hire for these positions? Like, what is the problem that the childcare providers are experiencing?
They're experiencing both retention and also finding new staff. Finding new staff is being looked at, but that's in a different bucket. That's in the workforce development bucket. But there are a lot of things. I mean,
Are you saying we have we're working on an ARPA, there's an ARPA request out for workforce?
Well, it's part of the
Development in this
workforce
area?
development process work that Nathan Norman is looking at. It's one of the sectors that we know needs help. So
Okay.
one of the things, there are very good training programs, and there are a whole different type of them. Some of the early, the entry level jobs can be, you can get training online through different services. And so that is a very viable way of getting some people into employment, and also then giving them a career path by getting them higher credentials and things like that. And that's something that I think is an important second element to retaining or to supporting our childcare providers.
So just so I'm clear, so Nathan is focused on recruitment our committee is focusing on retention, specifically retention.
Right, because it kind of the other thing sort of falls into economic development. It'll probably go to the economic development committee. One of the big challenges is there's a lot of crossover. in these
No, that's what I'm
things.
saying. And what is, why has it been hard to retain people? Is there any survey where we know why people have left?
We didn't do a
In
survey.
their words?
We've gotten a lot of information from our childcare providers. In some cases, some childcare workers left early and probably have not come back because they also had other responsibilities. A great many childcare workers also had their own children and couldn't stay, or had older family members, things like that. So they have basically left the field. And there have been a number of people who've left and have not come back. The other thing is a number of workers are older women and or older individuals, most of them women, and with underlying health challenges. So that also some dropped out earlier because of that health risk. Now, some of those may have come back because they were able to get, vaccinations and stuff. Remember when this first hit, of course, nobody could get vaccinated or anything like that, but there were childcare centers that have been open. And so a lot of childcare centers were not open the full time, but when they were reopening, they had these hurdles to overcome. But pay is always a challenge, and so that is for the people who are currently working. One of the most important things is to try to give them any financial benefit that at least recognizes their importance and the need.
I'm curious if we're still seeing if the childcare providers are still having an issue with retention, and if not at this later stage, is it worth narrowing the eligible employees to employees who are actually experiencing real hardship, as opposed to a blanket, as long as because I'm looking at this says cannot exceed 1.5 times the average wage. So it says, which is 90,000 annually.
No, that's not the average. That's not the childcare wages. That's the all occupations wages.
Okay.
That is the cap.
So do we know the average wages of the 600 and something people that we have here?
The estimate, the information from the Childcare Network of Evanston is that the highest paid childcare workers might be making $40,000 a year.
Okay.
So they are all very low
Yeah.
pay.
Yeah, that makes sense. I looked at I misunderstood the 90,000.
Yeah, no,
that's
they're that
decent.
yeah, that is the all occupations. That $90,000 figure is 1.5 times the total of the 1.5 times of all occupations for Cook County threshold that ARPA uses as a financial threshold. And sorry if that was confusing. We'll make sure that
We're still saying if there was somebody that made no more than this, that they would be eligible.
Pardon?
Or no?
If technically if somebody made just under that 90,000, they would be eligible. But based on everything, we talked to a number of childcare, executive directors and owners and stuff like that. Even the executive directors of the childcare centers aren't making that kind of money right now.
And are these ARPA guidelines or these are guidelines?
No, those are ARPA.
These are ARPA guidelines. Okay.
Those are not.
And then the second part, the employee is not exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act overtime provisions. Can you explain that?
That means they're basically an hourly worker. So it rules out management people. That was added from the interim rule to the final rule because people were complaining that it was too hard to figure out just the math, and they had to be more flexible. So their way of making it more flexible was to say if anybody who is subject to the hourly wage laws could be eligible. So we just put that in to show that all of it was compliant with the regulations.
And
If that's too
it's
confusing,
1 and
we'll
2,
take
it
it out in
says or,
future.
1 and 2, it says or and not and, which is a little confusing.
Right.
Should it be and?
No, they list it as or.
Okay.
In this industry, they're just, it is almost, it really is not relevant so much to our industry, but where the, or to the childcare industry, where it could come into play is in certain other types of jobs that could be eligible because they're front-facing workers. But honestly, I don't think there are that many that are. I think it might have been a way of saying, oh, look, we've made it more flexible, but it really doesn't expand anything. It just is a way of they did some other kind of weird things. They have a different scale for how they define low and moderate income, for example, that they thought was going to improve things for us. I'm not sure if it does. It kind of confuses it, but we'll show you a slide on that. They didn't, because ARPA has programs or will likely be supporting programs that are funded both by the Human Services, the Department of Human Services, and also by HUD. You have two different income scales. One uses % of area median income. The other uses % of the federal poverty line. So Jessica, I'm going to have Jessica pull up how you define low and moderate income for this, because it's, again, they've done a blended and a new format that we've never seen before for ARPA to try to encompass the needs and the familiar areas of different organizations that could be funded, which I'm not sure helps completely, but I'll explain to you how it works.
And
I've
then
spent a lot of-
last thing, it says not to exceed. So, I mean, technically, there may not be a need if they feel most of the workers are at 40,000, but we could set it lower than that, and it still would not be out of compliance with this order, correct?
Correct.
We could say no one that earns more than 45,000 annually, for example, because it says not to exceed 90,000.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I just wanted to show you one of the other groups that now one of the things is some organizations may be serving lower income families, but not through a scholarship program like the state CCAP or something like that. So the childcare centers will, or providers will have to be able to document that they have 51% or more of their workers at the lower income level in order to get the higher level of bonus. And this is also very different from the schedules used in other programs. They had a little worksheet that I put in information, and Bing, it gave me this chart. They have used, for low income, they're using 40% of area median income adjusted for household size, or 185% of the federal poverty guideline. And what's interesting about this is you can see how differently those scales work. I've tried to align them in the past and they don't align. So for ARPA, the threshold, the maximum that somebody can be, their income can be, a household income to be low income for ARPA is that yellow column. And you can see that what they did is they took whichever was higher, either the 40% of area median income or 185% of the federal poverty guideline. And that was done to try to accommodate the differences between housing and HUD-based programs like Cdbg and human services programs, which are SNAP and all those other things. And because otherwise the fear was people would be kicked out who were accustomed to getting other federal benefits. So there's some real peculiarities about ARPA, let me tell you. And so the same thing happens with moderate incomes. And they also did something that I haven't seen in our other grants before, and that they said, literally, if people or organizations are having a hard time figuring out income qualifications, they can use that 3-person household and just ask people if they are above or below those 2 threshold numbers, if their incomes are above or below that, and define them as either low income or moderate income, or not either. So it is not anywhere near as onerous a process for the childcare providers to be able to survey their families to income qualify them or not. But if an organization isn't willing to do that, then they're not going to qualify for the higher levels.
And I guess what I'm trying to focus on, there's a way to free up additional funds by excluding higher income childcare workers, so that we can provide larger assistance to the lowest income or employees making the lowest income. I think that would make more of an impact in terms of retention than just doing a blanket, all right, you get 12, you get 600. It would be more, I think, closely aligned with need than what we may be doing here. I'm not sure, because it seems pretty complicated the way this is working out. But
well, no,
that's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, this is for the households of the people they're serving, not for the.
Yeah, not the workers.
Yeah,
And
not
if
for
I
the
can-
workers.
Oh, this is not for the workers. I thought
Yeah,
this was
no,
for the population that they're serving.
Right.
And so that's actually, if I can jump back in and chair, if that's fine. And then I also do still want an answer to the other question, but I am fine excluding the organizations or the child care providers that, so essentially a child care provider could have 0 low income clients and still get $600 per employee. Is that correct under the current scheme?
Yes, they could.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of that. I don't know if this business had the ability to, didn't see revenue loss and was able to adjust prices appropriately based on the pandemic. And I don't know if we need to give them money. And to Councilmember Burns's, and I think to where Ms. Hayes was going, is that, we would then be able to free up more money for those folks who are providing for our low income community and maybe sacrificing more, and not necessarily rewarding entities who maybe weathered the storm well and do not provide a service for our low income residents.
We toyed with that, and we can certainly look at making a change to that. We have the basis of all of our calculations was the list off the DCFS's. DCFS has a list of licensed childcare providers, so that's what we're working with. And the only ones we have excluded to date are those that don't serve early childhood, because this is we're not doing the school districts after school care. Those are the ones that have been excluded. And we could put one possibility. I think it would be very difficult to put everybody to make everybody eligible. To make eligibility requiring 51% minimum for low or moderate income residents, because one of the things that we find, especially with the part day programs, is frequently they don't have they don't get CCAP and things like that, and they are not, they are much more, much less likely to have income information. That may not be enough of a how can I say this? Maybe we could look at, if this is a concern, having 2 levels. In other words, they would have to have, I don't know what percent of lower moderate income to be eligible at all, if that's the wish of the committee. But 51%, to require everyone to have 51% or more, I think would potentially rule out a lot of providers, because, you know, who still could need help. I guess that's the only way I can say it. So we could consider putting in some threshold for minimum threshold. Or we could put that in if that's the wish of the committee.
And I think Sarah and Councilmember Reed, something also to think of is that there's been a lot of studies around childcare and education in general, and having sort of those mixed incomes, low, moderate, and higher incomes, and the outcomes of those for children, you know, sort of in those diverse classrooms. And so we do want diverse classrooms from that standpoint as well. And so, while I agree with you, sort of a 0% low or moderate income, you know, that's sort of like the extreme on one side. But if it's 30%, or, you know, there's that scale from, you know, 50 and beyond that you would be sort of missing if you just got rid of that full 600 category. And so perhaps you know, must serve a certain percentage. Although if there's a large percentage that don't have any income information, that could potentially be an administrative challenge. I will also say, as a mom of a very young child, childcare is brutal right now. I mean, finding childcare is incredibly hard, even for people who are not low or moderate income. I like the wait lists are some of the longest I think I've seen. I have a 6.5-year-old and an 8-month-old, and sort of 2 experiences pre and post pandemic. And
well, I wonder
it's a world of difference.
Yeah, I just wonder if using funds to then expand services rather than. One thing I don't like about this is, so one, yes, I do agree with you. You know, that 0% is one level. I just want to make sure that folks that are in that category, or, you know, 10%, something very low, aren't getting these funds necessarily. And yes, I do, you know, I'm aware that having diverse settings is good. I also don't like knowing that this is an industry that has artificially kept its wages low. I don't like the idea of essentially rewarding an industry like this for artificially keeping their wages low, and almost incentivizing them not to increase wages on their own to create competition, or to create employee competition. And this almost gives them an out in some way locally from just naturally increasing their wages.
I think the issue with any providers that are providing through the DHS childcare program is that the rate that they receive is really set by the state. And so they don't actually have resources or the ability, because of how the payment structure works for enrollees, they don't have anywhere to turn to increase their wages.
That is true. If accepting CCAP, you cannot directly supplement that CCAP payment. And the CCAP, I think the only thing they did was, at least for a period of time, they didn't require any funds from some of the families receiving CCAP, because that's also I absolutely agree that the childcare wages have to increase, but I think it is a much more complicated thing that is much bigger than anything we can do. And I don't think it's the desire of the childcare providers, at least not the ones, the bulk of the ones that we work with, to not pay their workers more. It's just if you are doing a mixed group where you have scholarship, CCAP scholarship and other scholarships, and then you have full pay, you can't increase the one and you can't increase the full pay past a certain point either, because it is huge. People pay as much for childcare as they do for transportation and housing, and in some cases it's an astounding portion of their budget. And I think that the federal government was saying something like it should be no more than 7%, and it's way over 7% of many people. I think it is a huge issue.
And I think beyond the CCAP issue, which has very limiting of how they charge, is in order to increase wages, you have to increase what people pay. And there is I mean, obviously for high income folks, you know, it's a different situation, but it is a challenge for moderate and middle class families, along, of course, with a very large challenge for low income families as well.
And that the low income, the 185% of the federal poverty guideline, is the CCAP threshold. So that is really low.
And Councilmember Rito, you raised something that was also something I had been thinking about, and I thought it was an ARPA limitation, like of what the programs could be for, which was this isn't expanding capacity. This is really just sort of like stopping the bleeding, if you will.
Right.
But that's because ARPA had, like, is there something around a retention program, or is there some understanding there of why this is simply not focusing on expanding access and building?
Honestly, the group of childcare providers we were talking with, this group of 20, through the Early Childhood Council, the Evanston Early Childhood Council, the number one thing they said they needed help on right now still is retention. They do want to be able to expand, because one of the things we are working on many of them still haven't opened up the full number of slots that they had. And for a while that was impossible because of space limitations. They had to have more distancing. And now some of those things were removed. But in some cases, they are also they are unable to find new staff. So the workforce development and trying to direct people into childcare is really important. And we also think that a very important component could be looking at Spanish speaking workers who could be in childcare, because there is a real shortage of dual language or Spanish language childcare, places that can really do the dual language and the Spanish for children whose families speak Spanish. So that's as I say, that's the workforce development part. And we are also working on yet another thing. We don't know if we can figure it out, which is simply to figure out a way to give childcare centers, and this would be focused on the nonprofit and the ones serving low-income children, a specific amount, which is to figure out if there is some way we can give them, in essence, operating support to help overcome any of the other challenges that they are having. We did look at capital, because they were saying they had capital needs. What their capital needs were not really capital needs in many cases. They were largely operating costs due to or lack of increased operating costs due to COVID requirements. And they were saying things like, well, we we need more air filters, and that's capital, and that's not what the government thinks of as capital. So we're looking at yet another program. Tashik Kerr is working with us on that, trying to figure out if we can, again, we're looking at the number of slots that organizations have lost and trying to figure out if there is a sort of cost per slot or something that we can figure out as a way to make funding available to cover some of those needs. The challenge is we don't want to have to do underwriting of each organization in detail to try to figure out what their need is. You can create a class of entities, businesses, or providers of certain sort within an industry, and create a model and use it to not have to go through the rigmarole of really underwriting every single organization, which is a pretty onerous thing both for the organizations and for staff to do well. So those are all in the works, but we haven't gotten them licked, and we wanted to at least get the first need that the child care providers were saying their first and greatest need at the moment. So I think what I'm hearing is definitely that we would like to know is, should we put in a minimum number of lower moderate income families being served or children being served, so that those that are absolutely full pay are going to get weeded out? We can certainly do that. As I say, I don't think there would be very many of those. But we can certainly put something like that in.
So Sarah, could you explain and who would be weeded out and why? Because I'm trying to make sure.
Well,
and I know this was based on something Councilman Reed said, but who would
there
be
are
weeded
some
out and why?
organizations like Bright Start, which is in downtown Evanston, that I don't believe takes any kind of. Now, I could be wrong, and I may find out they have scholarship programs, because frankly, if we don't always know everything about all of them, but that is an example of one that I believe is full pay.
What do you mean by full pay?
There are no scholarship programs. It's just basically you have to have the income to be able to pay the whole childcare fee, which probably I don't know what those fees are, but I mean exactly, but I know that they are.
And so Councilman Reed, is your point that they probably can afford to increase their wages, or what is the rationale on excluding them?
Yes, that they can afford to pay competitively on their own, and regardless of that, just more so that the city doesn't need to prop up an organization, a childcare provider that doesn't provide childcare to low-income residents.
Okay, and then just to clarify my point earlier, the 610 staff, we got that number based on premium pay eligibility guidelines, correct?
What we
Because it
did
says staff estimated that approximately 610 staff could be eligible for premium pay.
Right, and we were simply looking at the number of providers, the number of slots they had, because we developed a formula based on the 20 who responded, that we got information of how many children do you serve, how many staff do you have serving that. We created a formula. And is it exact? It will be different for every childcare center or provider, because there are different requirements for levels of staff. If you have infants, for example, your infant ratio is 1 staff to 4 children at max.
And real quick, just so we get my question is, if we further narrowed the premium pay guidelines, right? Because what I was pointing out is that the premium pay guidelines state that it can't exceed 90,000, but we could add something to it and still be within ARPA guidelines to say that the average wage can't exceed 40,000, right? Which
Sure.
will reduce to 610 is my point.
Well, I
just want to make it clear what I was saying, because if there's people that are making $80,000 and $90,000,
sure,
I would much rather see larger contributions to lower income employees. Because I think that actually would help with retention. I think just a blanket $600, I don't know if that in and of itself, it's a nice gesture, but I don't know if that will make a difference in helping someone remain employed at a child care provider. I don't know if that's the thing. You know, it's a good gesture and I'm sure they'll appreciate it, but I'm not sure it will really realistically make a difference in terms of retention. So I just want to make sure my point was clear.
Right.
So then your real point is that we should give more than 600 to, or 1,200. I don't get what you're still saying there, because a childcare employee who works at a place, let's say that provides, and let's say this is one of the lowest paid employees in the city, childcare provider employees in the city, and they work for a childcare provider that provides services to 30% low income students. That employee, who is the lowest paid childcare provider employee in the city, would still only be eligible for $600 under the current guidelines. So none of the guidelines are based on how much money the employee makes, except for the cutoff for what employee can make money. But the amount of money that the employee gets has nothing to do with their income, their individual income, just to make that
I
clear.
see what you mean. Okay, now I get where
Correct.
the confusion was. Okay, so how is the 600 and 1,200 established?
We established it based on
The number of children that the service provider serves that are
low and
income.
moderate income. They have to be 51% or more to get the higher level. And if they're under that, it would be the lower level. Now, we could put, I think very reasonably, put a cap of the no
So
worker.
hold
could-
on. I'm not, so
Sorry?
so some providers will get only 600 for their employees and others will get 1,200?
Yes,
And who gets the 1,200 again?
If they serve 51%, a majority of the children they serve are from low and moderate income families, and
Okay,
they get the 1,200.
yes.
If they serve a majority not low or moderate, then they would get the 600.
Interestingly, the state had nothing on for anything. They funded everybody. And, you know, we were certainly looking to be more focused than that.
I still say that we can still increase that by decreasing the amount of people that are ultimately eligible. Now, I do understand where the 600 and 1,200 come from, but that is still restricted by the 500,000 that's in the program. Because if you do the math out, I think it came to 500 and some $1,000 over the $500,000, but it's it's an estimation. So, you know, it could be higher, could be lower.
What you're really saying is that we should base the amount of relief, instead of basing it, essentially what you're proposing is that we base the relief on how much income the individual worker makes, rather than the percentage of low income folks that the particular business.
I'm
serves.
saying both can coexist. We can keep it exactly like this. What I'm saying is we should regulate what happens after we give them this money. So it could be 1,200, but you're giving 1,200 to people that are making no more than $40,000 annually, for example.
Yeah, but you're same thing for another business that only serves 30% low income folks. If your goal is retention, that same worker who makes even less than the place that's given a worker 1,200, that worker that makes less than that is still only getting 600 under this plan, because they happen to work for a provider that does not serve a whole lot, over a majority low or moderate income pupils.
We got to talk more about this offline, because
Yeah,
what
we'll
I'm
talk
saying
about
is,
it offline.
yeah, we can adjust it. We could say 900 and 1,500 if we had more money, correct? We don't have to stay at six. This is the 600 and 1,200. We could, if we had more money, we could say 900 and 1,500, right?
We could, but the challenge we have is a lot of this is a very large estimate. You know, there's a lot of information that we are extrapolating. I'll give you an example. We have a relatively low number of children per for workers, because we were really trying to make sure that we didn't, like if we did an average based on all the slots and kept it, if you look at the total number of children in childcare and how many of them are likely to be older and not infants, we're making decisions that we're risking having it over, we're risking having an estimate that we would be off in a way that would not allow us to even provide the level of funding that we are proposing. I mean, I don't know that we will have anywhere near 610 eligible people actually. As I say, that's an equation based on the slots as listed by DCFS. We know not all of them have all those slots open, so they probably have fewer staff than that is estimated. There are a lot of assumptions, but that's the only way we could get to any kind of putting together a program. We couldn't have one that is, and I believe we have to say that we would be asking for up to $500,000 or some figure, and then say, as we said, is if we get, well, not even if we get, we can bring back what we have gotten to the committee and make sure that you believe that that what we've the program makes sense. One of the challenges too is if we have to ask for every childcare worker's income or something like that and try to figure out the different levels, we make something that is really unimplementable. And that is one of the biggest problems with a lot of grants. They're impossible to actually implement.
Can I jump in with one last thing?
Sure.
And I think this will really clarify for Councilmember Burns. So Sarah, the workers that are eligible to receive this, whether it's a $600 or $1,200, these are the frontline workers that are working directly with children, correct? This wouldn't be
Correct.
management?
This is not the management.
Yeah, and so the frontline workers who are working directly with children, are there likely, I mean, if out of the 600 and some odd, let's just say that is the perfect correct number, out of that 600 some odd workers, is it likely that any of them are making more than $60,000, $80,000? Yeah.
There, one of our very knowledgeable childcare providers said none of them would be making over 50, probably way less than that in most cases.
Yeah, and so so that's just what I'm pointing out. I think for Councilmember Burns, the confusion may be that even if we did exclude people making over $50,000, we still wouldn't really move the needle on who we're talking about.
Yeah, that's not, yeah. So that was my question. I thought you said on average it was 45,000 or something like that earlier. So
No,
that was based on the income of the folks who they serve.
yeah, no, that's not what I was talking about. So that was, I think we were just not understanding each other.
Yeah,
what I was
yeah,
always talking about is the employees. But now I understand, that makes sense.
it's a lot of numbers and a lot of confusion. It's not simple. Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that that we were not, because again, the premium pay allows for someone to be making, from 60 to 90,000, let's say, or 50 to 90,000. And but yeah, this makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Burns, your hand is, do you have more questions or is it just?
No,
I
that
just
was
don't
it.
want to.
Yeah, no, we're good. And I mean, if those childcare providers do have the money to provide premium pay for their employees without this, then there's merit to what Councilmember Reed is saying 100%. So, because that's also what I'm trying to get at. It's like these are public funds. We're trying to match it with the greatest need. I mean, that's just with everything we do, whether it's TIP funds, CDBG, like we're always trying to make sure that we're providing funds to address real need in ways that wouldn't otherwise be addressed without our intervention. So if there's merit to what he's saying, then I can go along with it.
Well, we can certainly say that they have to provide us their, what percent that they must have some percentage, they must have some children that fall into lower moderate income families. I mean, the threshold when you get into moderate income can look quite high, but it actually still requires a large family then, so if you're a family of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, it goes, wow, almost $134,000, but that there really probably aren't that many 8-person families that we're going to be finding, but we could put, if we were to put a minimum level on, I would recommend we keep it quite low, simply because I do think that there are providers that don't necessarily serve super low income people or but provide a very important service from an economic development, an economic standpoint. An example is some of originally the state didn't provide any assistance for part day programs. And one of the things that is important, there are people, for example, you may have somebody who isn't super wealthy, but is staying home and working part-time and puts a child in a part-time program. So they were saying, like, wait a minute, you've ruled out flexibility for people who are trying to balance their home life. So that's, it's difficult to come up with all the examples that we were given when we were talking about with providers of whenever you put in something that's very rigid, we were finding we were potentially ruling out organizations that really were providing an important service that allowed people to manage and not to high income people, but not necessarily to the lowest income people too. So, one of the challenges is as childcare is expensive, as Chair Oldfry says, everybody feels it.
And I'm confused because I thought we were talking about the fully funded providers. Now we're talking still about the need of the
No, part day, their part day childcare programs are eligible for this.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that it just because there are a lot of programs for various reasons that don't receive the childcare subsidies from DHS. And a lot of it is there's a lot of administrative requirements there.
Right.
And they might not meet it for a myriad of reasons. And that does not necessarily mean that they're not serving, lower moderate income needs. Worth noting, this moderate level of income, all of these children would be eligible for all kids. And CHIP. So like on the healthcare side, they're still pretty low income, truly, this moderate level. Derek,
but real quick, does it mean that institution though may have the revenue coming in or the funds coming in to provide premium pay on their own? That's what
they would have to raise childcare costs on families in order to raise. That's where the funding comes from. And that's why childcare is so tricky. Unlike others, they would have to raise.
Yeah.
And I promise you they have.
Yeah.
A lot of the part day programs are also really, they are nonprofits, and they are, the ones that are usually working out of a church facility and things like that. And so they are not charging a ton of money. And I would guess my children went to Northminster Nursery School. I don't think they were, that this was, it's not a high paying or always wealthy people that are being served.
And so it's safe to say that we wouldn't be giving premium pay to any or giving these funds to an institution that would have the ability to do this on their own without raising, cost on families, childcare costs for families.
We believe that we would not be paying for those who are able to do anything. do
Okay,
anything
thank you.
significant.
Derek, or
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, taking it back to, I think the motivation is behind the pay itself or the bonus itself, which is retention for these workers in these agencies. Do we have an estimate on what the impact of that would be? What percentage we would workers we would, or childcare providers we would essentially retain because of these types of grants? Like, do you know what the effect of this will be?
I don't have a number on it. I don't know how I could actually calculate that very effectively. So, you know, sometimes you do things based on logic models. And there have been a number of other organizations, including the state, that have done this. And we're hearing from the childcare providers that this, because we've talked these levels of, you know, we've talked about the levels. There are people who in the childcare industry who are groups that were not interested in really having multiple levels. They thought it should be, you know, and then there was also discussion of, well, can you give it to us and let us decide what amount of money we actually allocate to staff based on, you know, with some of the restrictions that they have to be front facing and stuff, but doing their own. And we did not necessarily think that was a great idea. For one thing, it makes it complicated to implement and to prove who has done what, and to make sure that what we think we're supporting is actually being done. But it really, Derek, it's really, I can't really say, oh yeah, we think we're going to retain 80%. It's just not something that I feel we have any information that would really make a projection like that. Now, there's nothing that says that an agency can't say, you know, you will, that, you know, break out. This is one of the things that we said, if they wanted to break something into 2 payments, you know, if you say, oh, you're going to get your second payment at the, you know, toward the end of the 6-month period, then they could do that if they wished to as a retention. We discussed doing something like that. And we actually even discussed whether or not we could implement a payment program through the system that the city uses for general assistance. And I got to tell you, the childcare centers were just like, that would have been very complicated. We would have had to got a lot more information and detail about how to who was eligible and give them cards and they could be paid. And again, it just became something that wasn't implementable given the scale of what we're doing. If you're giving somebody a subsidy like GA every month, it makes sense to have that sort of a system, but it just wasn't implementable in a practical way if we were to try to do that for childcare workers and say, do quarterly payments or something like that. It just, the complexity of it outweighs what we're trying to accomplish in a way that, you know, we don't have the staff to implement that sort of stuff, and neither do we have to have a lot of personal information and do a lot of setting up of accounts and things like that just wasn't feasible. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I tried to.
No, thank you.
So other questions? I think I heard from Councilmember Burns and Councilmember Reed a desire for staff to go back and sort of understand the income breakdown of those served and sort of get a better sense of, you know, we sort of know about half serve 51% low and moderate income. What is that out like? What did the others sort of look like? And then, you know, are there?
No, I wouldn't say that that's what I want. And
Oh, okay.
Councilman Burns can speak for himself. I wouldn't say that that's the task I want staff to do. I think on that, we can just design the program to make sure it captures that. I don't need staff to have that ahead of time. But what I would like to, and maybe I think I just heard Sarah say this, I would just really love to understand the impact of this program. And so I'd more so like to know what we think this will do to actually increase retention, how many folks we expect to retain, or I would just really love to have more information on what we actually think the efficacy is of this program based on, since we're saying that the rational basis for this expenditure is the fact that we want to increase retention. I just wish we knew or had some kind of estimate on what the retention rates would be with and without this program.
Got it. Thank you, Councilmember Reed. I think if we are to go down the road of limiting based off of some percentage of income, then I guess I would request that we sort of have a sense of, if we're picking a number, what does that number mean? Like if we're saying, okay, you have to serve 25% lower moderate income, what is the impact of that decision on the, how many workers is that excluding? I mean, what does that look like? And so I guess then I will request that if we're going down the route of having a threshold of low and moderate income served beyond the 1,200 and the 600 sort of already structured, I would just like to sort of understand what our decision actually, I don't want to pull a number out of thin air. I'd sort of like to understand the number of children being served sort of by those facilities and how many facilities and workers we're talking about. But I don't know if DHS or DCFS have any information from the state program on retention, or maybe even the childcare providers. They received that. They might know, they might have their own records of after this, they saw
We could
retention.
certainly,
Yeah.
we could certainly ask the providers, what impact the money they received from the state had on their on retention, and see if we can get information. We've had, I'm looking at the work. We have a lot of different worksheets. I think Jessica, we had 20 organizations that we got the last survey, our sort of sample survey, which was, how many children do you serve? How many staff do you have who would be, gateways, and how many, what percentage are low and moderate income? So that was how we got at this. And that was, I think, a fairly representative group of the childcare providers that we generally work with in social services, the ones that do provide a relatively high level of service to low and moderate income.
I would say that's correct,
families.
Sarah. We were able to capture information from 7 home care providers, and that's not a population that we hear from very often. And those home care providers serve predominantly low moderate income families. We also, in an attempt to structure this program several months ago, have been working with childcare agencies to understand their pre-COVID budgets, their budgets sort of for 2020 and then 2021, the populations they've served and their staff levels. And so I could say, while we did the number of children, the number of slots per children when we were coming up with this budget, we did pull that off of the DCFS list. But we are looking at for a lot of our major providers, and I'm sorry, I'm pulling up some of those spreadsheets now. Again, the population they served and how many low moderate income families they worked with, how many total children they have, how many total slots they have, and sort of those ratios. And we did, and we do believe that the majority of our child care agencies who responded are serving you know, certainly a low, moderate or moderate income group. We didn't hear from everyone. And we can certainly go back and try and get information. But I have to say there is a certain amount of fatigue on the part of the agencies when it comes to responding to my emails and providing this information, because as I'm sure everyone understands and is sensitive to, this is an unprecedented time, and the stress levels are just, the agencies are very, very stressed out. And so to even gather as much information as we'd like from a broad population of agencies can be very challenging and very burdensome.
I do think we could, I'm happy to try to find out if we can get any information either from our providers or from the state, if they have any information on the impact on retention. You know, we don't really have good contacts at the state directly, but maybe some of the childcare workers do, childcare centers do, or do you?
It was and I just can't recall, was the incentive program, did it run through DHS or DCFS?
DHS, I believe.
Oh, perfect.
And
I will connect you with their chief of staff this evening.
Great, that would be very
maybe.
helpful.
I can say, if the committee is interested, that you know, these bonus pay programs are happening across the country. And I can provide more information if people would like. Georgia, for example, that state is working to give out 3 rounds of funding for a $1,000 bonus per staff member, again, across the board. In Minnesota, they've got a scholarship program available in bonus pay that pays an average of $2,150. So there is quite a range. And in DCFS, infant and toddler workers are eligible for $10,000 to $14,000, again, over a period of time, depending on the position. So room assistants are paid, are provided a lower bonus than room leaders and teachers, for example. But these are not SLFRS funded programs necessarily. These are state-run programs, and so there's a much wider range of
The states got funding directly as a part of ARPA for many things, for childcare, for mental health, and all those things. So there are programs being done by a lot of states, and some of the very large cities. I think it was Washington, D.C. was giving its, you know, they were saying, we're going to give all our childcare workers $10,000 in a year. And, you know, people said, well, how are you going to sustain that? And I said, well, we don't have a plan for that. So that, you know, this is a challenge. It really is a challenge, but we will see if we can get information on the impact. And even if it's anecdotal, we'll talk to the, you know, not quantifiable in terms of any projectable things. We'll see if the childcare providers can, our Evanston childcare providers can give us some information on the impact that they're, that the state funding that they may probably all have applied for and gotten by now would have had on them. And if there were any who didn't apply, if they are aware, you know, if are they having more trouble, we'll see if we can get information on that. And we'll bring back whatever we can. Would you like us to do any further work on, I don't know if we have, one of the things that Jessica and I could do is, from our various questions and things we've polled childcare centers on, we can try to see if we have, if we look at all that information, if we have more information or more information on what percentage of childcare centers are serving what percentage of low and moderate income children, and then maybe say if you do want to consider a minimum number or percentage of low mod that you would like to see served, we could try to come up with something that we think would be an appropriate level if that were to be added. Would those things be of help to the committee? And are there any other things? I mean, there are a lot of other questions, I know, and we appreciate the questions. It's important to talk these things through because it's, you know, it's kind of this is the one of the things about these stimulus bills is you're creating the plane as you're flying it, was the expression they used for the neighborhood stabilization programs that were the mortgage foreclosure crisis ones. You know, it's just things are being done that nobody's done before, and you don't always have the data that you would like to have, but you still need to think it through and feel comfortable with how we're allocating funding. And so it's important to us to try to get what additional information we can that will facilitate the committee's decision. Is there any other?
Sarah, real quick, are there are there providers that could get funding at the $600 level who aren't providing childcare for any low to moderate income families?
We did not put a lower threshold. We just said they could be eligible for that. And we could look at a way to weed out organizations that are doing absolutely no low and moderate income.
And sorry, I'm coming around a lot slower today on this discussion than I like to, but so if that is the case, and that was the point Councilman Reed was trying to make. I agree with that. And I think what I'm trying to achieve, and I think that's the way to do it, is how can we find a way to narrow the eligibility or the target, who we're trying to target, so that we can provide larger.
Yeah, I think our chair gave a really good suggestion to
Because
that.
all those other examples that we provided, and I know a lot of those were state-funded programs, they made larger contributions to the employees that I think could help with retention, right? If you get 3 $1,000 contributions, that can make a difference. So yeah, so I'm sorry coming around late, but yeah, I think that makes sense.
So we will look to try to figure out some threshold, if you will, for that must be something lower than 51% or more, but more than 0. That
I think our chair gave a pretty good, I think that based on, we can confirm this, but I think just based on the standards of how you want mixed, I'm applying this to just like mixed developments and,
Yep.
So I'm assuming that this math kind of plays out the same here, that you want at least, kind of 30-30-30 to have a fairly, equitable mix, 30% of, folks being at least that low moderate income threshold. So I think that could be the minimum threshold to even receive the 600 is where I'd be happy to put that minimum threshold.
And with that, if we could just also understand what that means, right? Like, did that narrow it so that is there room to,
Yeah.
But what, and not only the number of facilities, like 2 facilities, but then also the number of families, or kids.
the
I think would be
difficulty is
helpful.
we won't get that information until we actually have all of them applied. You see what I'm saying? Because we don't.
I do now. Thank you, Sarah. That's
And that's, I would love to have that, but it's, and I don't think it will be very difficult to get organizations to apply or give us that information before, because as Jessica said, we have some that are just like, I can't do anything until I know I'm going to get something out of it. And we've had some that have been incredibly responsive and tried to, have bent over backwards to try to get us information and to even get information from some of the other providers. And Jessica personally called and followed up with and, got hold of our home care providers, which we're really not responding to the list. So we've tried to do a lot. I just don't know how to get information from the providers in advance to be able to say what that is. So what I was thinking is we could look at the range from the ones that we have information on and try to come up with a recommendation that I think would be accomplish the goal of making sure we're not providing support to those organizations that are not serving any low and moderate income or whatever the minimum is we put in there. And then what Jessica and I do feel is going to happen is when we're going to put out the application saying this is what the sort of idea of what the funding levels will be, but how much it will actually be available will be subject to however many organizations actually fall into those categories, and how close our estimates are on the numbers of total teachers too. So that's one of the biggest challenges. As I say, it's kind of like saying how many small businesses might need assistance, and that have lost 40% of their revenue and trying to estimate how many it is without really having any way of doing it. But they're not.
But Sarah, this would increase our chance of being able to provide future funding rounds for premium pay with the same budget, correct? If we made these changes.
It would increase our ability to give them additional premium pay. Is that what you're saying?
At a later point, depending on how many people apply, if
Well, it would make it easier to implement. Whether or not how much more we could extend premium pay is something I'm not really prepared to try to make any comment on at this point. We had, the $500,000 that is budgeted in a bucket for it right now, we're saying we're devoting to this program because it does seem to be the most this is one of the most needy groups of people because childcare workers are very low income in general, and most of the providers are nonprofits or extremely small businesses that are almost subsistence. Many of the people who have a home-based care service don't make a lot of profit. It's almost, in some cases, it allows moms to stay home with their own children while taking on in other children. That's what it frequently is started out as the motivation for opening in-home child care centers, as I understand it, or can be. So I don't want to say that it could help us implement future.
Yeah, I was just going off of the
Premium pay?
math. The 610 times what you said we pay is like 580,000. So if we're providing less providers with premium pay, we should have additional funds, might have additional funds for future rounds. But I think Kathy has her hand up.
Yes, Kathy.
To know once again, what is some of the suggested implementation timetable for this? That's it. Because I know that we're now into summer, children are out of school. And I do appreciate that we're trying to get the most people that are paid the least some funding, some additional funding for issues of retention. But when are we trying to do this?
We have a slide for that. We'll put that up. And this would be if everything's fast-tracked.
So this is our implementation schedule. If the committee were to approve the budget for this project tonight. The budget would go to Human Services, the Human Services meeting in July, and potentially City Council at the end of July. So we could open up the application process in August, and provide updates to the Social Services Committee in September. And it could be at that time that we adjust our benefit levels.
So, Jessica, that's actually an interesting thing you just mentioned. I mean, when we ask for applications, like obviously approval has to come back. Like, do you ask for like, do you typically give full criteria, or have anything where criteria is subject to change, or how does that?
So yeah, oftentimes applications, and I'm thinking of like scholarships for camps, for example, are sort of first come, first serve. But our goal with this was really to hold the application open for potentially, a significant chunk of time to give as many providers the opportunity to apply, especially those who are home care providers and who we may have trouble reaching, right? We want to be sure that we're really reaching providers who are most in need, right? And not just the biggest and the first. We learned from the payroll, the states or the Fed's PPE program. That's a bad joke here on a Thursday night. But yes, I hope that answers your question. So we could at that point see who applied and sort of tweak our criteria to prioritize agencies serving 30% low to moderate income households, for example. We could tweak it or to prioritize agencies that primarily employ women and people of color. Sarah, stop me if I'm going too far out on a limb. And then depending on where that leaves us in our $500,000 budget, we could, adjust the bonus pay, the premium pay levels, or expand our reach to other agencies, depending on what the committee potentially has the appetite to do.
One possibility that occurred to me is we can certainly say that we expect to have a sliding scale, if you will, of support that would be tied to the percent of children who are from low and moderate income families, and give sort of some estimate, and say that this will be finalized once we actually have applications. That would be a possibility to do. So we would be requiring that they all give us that information. And then, we could make it clear that there would be some threshold of low and moderate income that would be under the 51%, but, we have to see how many people apply or something like that. We'd have to work on the wording, but that would give us some flexibility to really say, oh, look, we've got, we're not gonna, I'm just making up the numbers. Say we thought 30% would be a good second number, and we find that a bunch of centers, there's almost nobody that's at 30, but a number of them were at 25, and we just ruled out, that type of thing. One of the interesting things is one of the, I can't remember which center it was, made a huge appeal to the state when the state originally was not going to do part day centers at all. And they convinced, because the state was basically, well, this isn't full-time childcare, therefore these aren't people who really need as much help. And they explained how they can be very important to the type of situation I was talking about before. So sometimes what happens is there's stuff that goes on in every area that we don't think of if we're not in literally in that area. And so I want to try to keep us from eliminating some groups that could be very important, which was why we kept everything open to part-time and didn't want to make that mistake. It's like, the state learned from that, but at the same time, having a percentage of children that are low and moderate income could weed out the ones that really are just serving people who, I mean, are using it more as only as a socialization tool for their children, and somebody's at home full time and doesn't really need childcare for their work or something like that. That's an example of what we might be able to eliminate that kind of help. But we wouldn't want to eliminate providers where there'd be a mix of those, because that's that mixed income household, mixed income classes and experiences. So what would the committee, we could also do another thing. We could try to just come back with a refined how we could do a form to try to give us that flexibility and present that to the committee before going forward, if that would be of help. Trying to come up with things that'll be actionable, because I know it's hard. We don't know exactly what we'll be able to give you. So I don't want to make it an exercise that isn't going to be able to inform decisions. But
If I can offer a suggestion, Chair, and certainly I think this is a decision most appropriately made by the non-council members of this committee. But I personally think that this would be fine moving forward to human services, and just to keep the ball moving, and then dealing with it at human services and ultimately council. But as someone who serves on both of those bodies, that might be kind of a selfish thing. And so, because I'll still have a chance, so I'll really leave it to the other members of the committee. But I'll just lay that out there.
That's helpful, Council Member Reed. And I was thinking, especially as it's still working its way through. It gives, I'm just looking at this timeline. We push it back. We're really, moving further and further out. So I have some comfort with that as well, especially given that as it's further refined, it would still come back through the committee and still continue to be worked on with human services and with the full council. But I will pause and make sure that we hear from other non-council committee members as well.
I think
Second.
Amanda has a hand up.
I was just gonna say that I agree. I am supportive of this as it stands. I know that staff did a lot of work on it. I'm supportive of it. And yeah, if there's further revisions that need to take place, maybe that can happen. But I just feel like, these are the workers that work so hard. They're underpaid. I don't see any reason why we would want to exclude anyone, no matter who their students are, so I am in support of this as it stands.
Great. And Kathy said yes. So I think I'll pause again, but I think we have a motion. We could need a motion to approve the budget.
So you need someone to make a motion? Is that what you're asking, Chairwoman?
I think so. I'm pausing
So
because I'm
moved.
waiting for Jessica to tell me I'm wrong on something.
I think, I'm sorry, I was just trying to collapse my screen share.
Oh, okay.
See who was
I saw you looking and I thought, maybe I don't know.
No, thank you. So there was a move to approve.
Yeah, so moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Reed.
And I need a second.
Second.
Thank you. And Jessica, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. you guys have changed up on me. I apologize, but Archana Sud,
Yes.
thank you. Chair Olds Fry,
Yes, I really think whatever we could do to support these frontline workers who have been doing some of the hardest work and the hardest 2+ years imaginable. I fully support that.
Vice Chair Ohanian, Vice Chair Ohanian,
Yes.
thank you. Amanda Ngola,
I wholeheartedly support it.
Cherie Lackey,
Yes.
thank you. Kathy Hayes,
Yes, I support this love ministry of 2 years of people who have been sweating on the front line.
thank you. Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Great, and Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. We will move this to Human Services. And we'll say this is the plan structure, but the application will go out and we will come back to the Social Services Committee to make any adjustments. And that we are asking them also to approve that to be a committee level decision. This is kind of in line with some of the things that happened with CDBG. By the way, you know, the city council approves the broad allocation of CDBG funding by goal. And then if there are changes at certain levels, at certain like tweaks to programs that are funded, that's allowed to be done by the committees, the Housing and Community Development Committee, because taking all that stuff back to council is just not functional, and the full council trusts the committee to know the details and take responsibility for that. So am I understanding that correctly, and how we should present that?
You are, Sarah.
Okay, want to make sure.
At least that is my understanding.
Yeah.
And Archana's as well.
And Councilmember Reed, is that in line with what you were thinking, that then, that?
It sounds good. Wasn't in line with what I was thinking, but that sounds like a perfect plan.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I really do appreciate all the discussion and the input. Jessica and I really value it. It's a challenge to try to come up with these things and try to make sense of them. And you all asked a lot of very good questions and made us think about things. And as I say, I think we will have flexibility if we find that we will look at putting some kind of indication that these are, the application is for assistance, for funding, but there are going to be final decisions on what the funding amount for what criteria is subject to application numbers and the nature of those applications.
And Sarah, if you can also, I don't know if this is a Cook County thing, but I just would really, to me, even who it goes to based on low to mod doesn't matter to me. I think I would like to combine this with additional funding so we can do future rounds. Because I really think that's what's going to help towards retention. To me, this is, again, a great gesture, but I don't think it's going to do much for retention. And so if we can look into combining this with Cook County funds or other funds, or even making a larger ARPA contribution towards this, that's what I'm interested in. So we'll pick the conversation up at Human Services, but I just want to make that clear for the record.
Okay. And we could certainly propose that this is going to be partly, that this is something that would be implementable again in sequence as an ongoing thing, as needed, if you would like us to put that kind of information in for discussion by Human Services, so it brings it forward.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Got to make a note then, so I actually remember to do it. Okay. Is there anything else?
So
Jessica.
I do have a brief staff report. I recognize it's late and I appreciate everyone's time, and I'll try to keep it under 10 minutes. I first wanted to let the committee know that Stephen Vick from Infant Welfare Society, who received an award, a $75,000 award for the Teen Baby Nursery Program, has requested to use a portion of those funds for his baby toddler program. So the Teen Baby Nursery is located primarily at the high school, if I'm not mistaken. And the baby toddler nursery is at the Infant Welfare's main location on Main Street. They are essentially the same program, serving a very similar population. The baby toddler nursery serves parents who are slightly older. But I wanted to bring this back to the committee. So, we believe that this is a fine use of funds. And, so I'm just letting the committee know. And then I also have, forgive me, one more slide. Because we did receive our long-awaited Cdbg Award for 2022. So our total award was, you could see, just under $1.7 million. The public services portion of that award is 15% of the total award plus our program income. So we actually have, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have my number here. We actually have about $280,260 to allocate toward public services. Now our case, we've
allocated it already, so
excuse me, yes.
we're in good shape actually, because it's well within, it is actually about $5,000 less than we had estimated. The grant came in lower because they actually cut Cdbg a little bit in the actual bill, but our program income was higher than we had in our estimate last fall. So it came in very close. So it really has no impact on what we've already allocated between. The only thing it will is it just trims the amount that was left for supportive services by about $5,000.
So the committee allocated the $292,500 for case management and the $523,700 for safety net. So our total allocation to date is the $816,200. But yep, as Sarah mentioned, so our total amount available for counseling for supportive services is $347,845.
And that's combining the 2021 with the 2022.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And that is my total staff report. So, were there any questions?
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right.
You guys.
Right. We did say I would have another opportunity for public comment. I don't think you see anybody, right?
No, there are 3 people who have stuck it out with us though. So thank you.
Thank you guys.
Members.
And with that, we will adjourn.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah and Jessica, especially.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.